Thanks all for coming to our panel on Representation Matters. So happy to have you all. We have a wonderful panel here today. We're going to be talking about the need for representation in literature, how we can really make it happen through your work as an author. We have two beautiful authors here who are going to be sharing their examples and advice and experiences, challenges. We're going to try to keep it real and be really authentic and personal. And if you have questions along the way, we have questions that we're going to ask, but also if you have questions, just raise your hand. We can pause. It's a small enough group that we can answer and then continue on. And definitely at the end, we'll have time for questions too. Does that sound okay? Is this loud enough for everyone? Yes? Great. My name is Nishita Roy-Pope. I'll be your facilitator today. I am a new author, a few weeks old. I'm like in my infancy of being an author. I have my first book called Courage Kids, The Magic Soccer Ball, which is for ages 7 to 9. But really happy to be here today. And I have a background working in large companies really around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this topic is very personal to me from my career. And now I'm a full-time entrepreneur, and a lot of my work is also focused on representation, making sure people feel included and have access to opportunity. So I'll be your moderator. Really the stars of our show today are the two people sitting next to me. We have Gledé Kabongo and Tiara Perry, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you too. They are established authors. They have great stories to share. So really happy to have this panel and conversation with you all. So to start, love for each of you, Gledé and Tiara, so please just introduce yourself, share a little bit about your background, your story, anything you'd like our audience to know before we dive into our questions. So Gledé, I'll start with you.
Sure. My name is Gledé Browne Kabongo. I write psychological thrillers. I am the author of 7 novels. And my background is in marketing and communications, a little bit of journalism. That's my foundation. So I've typically worked for companies in the high-tech sector. I did a stint with United Way, the nonprofit, but primarily tech background in Marcom.
Thanks, Gledé. Where do you live? Anything about your family that you want to share?
Sure. I live in North Attleboro, which is about 20 minutes from here, so it's practically Rhode Island. I'm married with 2 boys, and my oldest, he's manning the booth right now while I'm here. So he'll learn valuable skills about engaging with people and hopefully learn something.
Thanks, Gledé. Tiara, how about you?
Excuse me. I'm Tiara Perry, and I've done a lot of very odd jobs through my life. I've been a performance artist, I've been a DJ, I've been a nursing assistant, I've waited tables, I've been a bartender. Oh my God, you name it. If it's an odd job, I've done it. I've done yard cleanup. I know I don't really look like I do that, and I certainly can't anymore. But I used to do a lot of things. I always wanted to be an author, though. Now I live in Rhode Island. I'm from Florida. I lived kind of all over New England, but I met somebody, got married, and now we live here in Rhode Island with our child and our dog and my walker, who I named after an anime character, and I could not get around without. So I write YA fantasy. It is a lot of coming of age stuff. And it's not your usual characters. A lot of them have some differences. So,
great, thanks, Gledé and DR. So I like to start with some fun questions, easy questions, fast questions, just so you can get to know our panelists a little bit better. You have only 10 seconds to answer these maximum. You cannot pass. You can pass. You can pass on one. Okay, so to each of you, what is one thing that's on your life bucket list?
I'll give you 2 things. 1, I want to visit Ireland, and 2, I want to win an Oscar for Best Screenplay.
Like that. Tiara, what about you?
I want to go to Japan, Kyoto, and I want to go to another Weird Al Yankovic concert, because I love him.
If you could have a theme song every time you entered your room, what would it be? I'll start with you, Tiara.
Weird Al Yankovic again, poke your eyes out.
Love that. How about you, Gledé?
I may have to pass on that one. I don't have one.
Okay, that's your pass. That's the only one. What's your favorite genre to read? We're going to talk about what you write, but your favorite genre to read.
Dark academia.
Dark academia. Okay.
I like thrillers and romance.
Okay, thank you. Where do you find most inspiration for your writing? Like out in the world, where is it place? Is it a thing? What happens? Anyone want to answer?
My inspiration comes from all kinds of places, especially my in-laws. I don't know who they hang with, but they have the most fascinating stories. And I listen to them, I'm like, that could be a plot point. And as a matter of fact, one of the stories they told me is included in here. I wrote an entire chapter with a scene based on a story that they told me. So my in-laws are a great source. It could be a newspaper article, it could be, just hanging out with someone, so just a variety of places. Dreams. This book was a dream. My husband gave me a 2-sentence synopsis and said, I had this dream that you should write this book. This is the synopsis, and literally, I wrote an entire novel from a 2-sentence synopsis, so it comes from everywhere.
I love that. I did not think you were going that way with your in-laws. Normally when you say, my in-laws give me inspiration, it doesn't end so well. How about you, Tiara?
I have a tagline I used to use, real characters, fantastic worlds, and it's like really people. After doing so many odd jobs through my life, and now doing kind of not so odd physical therapy and many doctor's visits and all sorts of things like that, it's people, just all kinds of people that you meet and see and talk to, hear about the way people touch each other's lives and the spaces between the similarities and differences that people have with each other.
Love that. Last kind of easy question, then we're going to get a little bit deeper. If you could have lunch with any author, past or present, who would it be?
I thought about this for a long time, and it was going to be my past, but I would say Harlan Coben. One, because he's the king of the twist. I would love to have lunch with him and figure out how he comes up with his amazing twists, but also because I want to tell him that he was responsible for a father-son bonding moment with my husband and son because of the opening of one of his novels. And they called me, my son's like, Ma, you gotta hear this. And they were listening to it in an audiobook. And do you guys want me to tell you what it was?
Sure.
Do you have time? Sure. So the line was, Daisy wore a clingy black dress with a neckline so deep it could tutor philosophy. And they just, see, I thought it was funny. And they just thought it was the funniest thing, and that's the opening to Harlan Coben's Don't Let Go. So I would love to have lunch with him.
How about you, Tiara?
Well, I thought about this a lot, and I've had lunch with a lot of authors that are still living, so I have to pick someone who's not with us anymore and hasn't been for quite some time, and that's Oscar Wilde.
And why? Why Oscar Wilde?
Because I want to see kind of what it was like for him, his experience, being a queer man at the time that he lived, because there's so much going on in the world for queer people right now that I think he might have some insight that could be very valuable to people I care about. So
that's a great reason. Okay, now we're getting deeper. Y'all ready? Those were the light questions, the easy ones. So I'd like to know from both of you what inspired you to write in general, but specifically, why is diversity important to you in your work as an author? Because that is the topic of our conversation today.
So I grew up in the Caribbean and immigrated to the U.S. when I was 13, and so during that time I was always surrounded by books, and you've heard it a million times, the kid with the book in the hand. Up to this day, my mom's like, yeah, you always had a book in your hand. So I was one of those kids. My mom loved to read, and so I was just surrounded by books and people who love books. I used to listen to radio dramas a lot. There was this Australian radio drama called The Castlereagh Line, and it was just so suspenseful, and it taught me a lot about complex villains and cliffhangers, and keeping people at the edge of their seats, because every single day everybody wanted to know what happened, and so that was a big thing. I didn't think that I wanted to be an author because I wanted to be a journalist. So I studied comms and journalism in college, and I, did a little journalism. But it wasn't until 2011 that I got bitten by the writing bug. I'm like, I love stories. I love books. I think I could do this. And so that was when it started for me. And I took a class. I attended a writers conference for the first time, and that was the beginning of my journey. In terms of diversity, in a way, it was almost sort of a default setting for me, if that makes any sense. I didn't see a lot of people in literature who looked like me, and maybe I was too young, it didn't really bother me, but perhaps as I got older, I'm like, wait a minute. And so, I write diverse characters. I don't hit readers over the head with the fact that they're diverse. I've had many conversations with people who've come back to me and said, wait a minute, I didn't pick up on that. So I guess perhaps I'm a little subtle in that, but I enjoy writing that, and I enjoy creating characters that are, I guess subconsciously my goal is to have people view diverse characters through a different lens that, in the sense of, yeah, there are differences, but at the end of the day, they're just like you too. And so my books, although they feature diverse characters, have universal themes that no matter who you are, they'll resonate with you.
Thanks, Gledé. Yeah, what inspired you to write, and why is diversity important to you?
I really wanted to write because I found out that there were two names on a book, and one was the title of the book, and the other one was a person who wrote the book. And I was like, I want to be that person who wrote a book. And then I realized it's a lot more complicated than that, because sometimes that wasn't the person's real name. And sometimes the reason it wasn't their real name is because they were a woman and they were writing in a men's genre or something along those lines. I read a book, and it was, I think I was maybe 13 at the time. Brightness Falls from the Air, and it was a sci-fi novel, and I cried my eyes out, and I thought it was by a man for years. And then I got into my 20s, and I was at a science fiction convention, and somebody was talking about that book, and I was like, well, it moved me to tears. I couldn't believe a man wrote characters that made me cry like that. And I'm like, a woman wrote that. And I'm like, what? Still, I was blown away by that, and I knew when I was in elementary school that people used pseudonyms in genre fiction all the time. So, I felt like, if I'm going to write, I've got to have barriers, and I guess I kind of copped out of it for a while. I kept writing. I wrote for a long time, but I never really did anything with it. Not until 2016. And at that point, it was sort of like my health wasn't the way it was, and I couldn't do everything I used to be able to do, and I couldn't sit at a keyboard. Maybe not so much anymore. Something's wrong with my wrist, and we're not sure what, but I can sit at a microphone. So I've even found a life hack for that. So I think what really keeps me writing, even now when it's harder and more challenging, is because of diversity and adversity. It's because it's harder, so more people need to hear what I have to say, because more people need to know that it's not the same for everybody. More people need to, have the ability to go pick up a book that is, maybe by someone who isn't like them to give them that insight, or maybe is by someone who is like them, and they can say, hey, wait a minute, if this person can write this, then why can't I write something? Even if it's not a novel, even if it's a song, even if it's a poem. I put characters like myself or like friends of mine or in my books. I had to start using a walker, and I wrote Make Yourself. And that's the first book in the series about a boy named Ben who gets run over by a truck, and he cannot walk without crutches anymore. So I put my own experience of having to use an assistive device into a fantasy series about a boy going to a psychic high school. He's not exactly the same as me for a lot of reasons, but in one crucial way he is. And a lot of people expect him not to be able to do the things that he does, but he does them anyway. So I think that it's important, diversity in work, because it can inspire you to keep going even when it's harder.
Thanks, Deanna. Your story is super inspiring. So we are here because we hopefully collectively agree that diversity matters. But what are some of the challenges that you as authors are facing when trying to accurately and authentically include diverse characters and experiences in your writing?
So I think universally, right? You don't need to look like someone or have their exact experiences to connect with them. So I think for me, when I think about diversity in my writing, I think about the baseline, right? So that character needs to be a fully formed, complex human being with, a strong background, things happen to them, they have a certain upbringing, and, and diversity can also be, in what they do for a living, for example. So in this book, my protagonist is a director of bioinformatics. Bioinformatics falls under the STEM umbrella. There aren't a lot of women in STEM. It's getting better now, but when I wrote this book, I don't think there was a ton of that. And that resonated with readers because they would talk about that in the reviews. So I think first and foremost, think of diverse characters. Human beings, complex. Their experiences, have formed who they are. So I think that's level one, and just knowing that, not everybody's the same. We all different, even diverse characters. Next, I think, do the research. If someone doesn't have the same experiences you do, I have to kind of think about what's the research and what can I learn? And obviously speaking to people, who are, represent the character that I'm trying to develop. Sometimes I also use my own experiences. So I worked at a job first out of college where I organized life sciences conferences. And so my job was to recruit the scientists, stay on top of the research, know which pharmaceutical and biotech firms were doing the research, and just, kind of put everything together. And so that kind of helped me with that background to create this character who was the director of bioinformatics, because I actually did a conference on bioinformatics. So I think that can bring diversity to the stories, that I tell as well.
Thanks, Gledé. Diar, how about for you?
So when you're talking about writing with diversity, I tend to try to write and also recommend that people, who ask me this question, write something that they can humanize, something they can empathize with, and that they can feel is a real person. Because if you're going to put a disabled character into your book and have them just be there for the main character to rescue in a couple of scenes and have them be grateful to them, then don't put the disabled character there. Have it be an abled character. Why can't the main character just rescue a regular abled person? Why do they have to be disabled? Don't use that there. If their neighbor who they interact with and say hi to every day is disabled, then great. That's just a regular everyday interaction. But then you're just, it's like the opposite of, and I'm sure maybe you've heard the term fridging. That's when the writer kills the love interest of the main character to show how evil the villain is. And the love interest has no real depth or personality or any trait other than being beloved by the main character. And it's there to show traits of good and evil in the main character and the antagonist. So you're basically dehumanizing a disabled person to make the main character look more heroic than you've shown through their other actions. Just make it a regular person, if you have to have, or an animal, have them save a kitty cat or a doggy, because you're treating a person in a wheelchair, or a person with dementia, or a kid on crutches like a cat or a dog, and that's not cool. Another thing to look out for is if you can make a character intersectional, and Gledé was talking about this, where your character is not just diverse because of the color of their skin, or because of their religion, or because they're disabled, or they're queer, or any other trait like that, but also because they're in a rare profession, or they're studying a rare subject at school, they have a rare atypical major, special course of study, or maybe they've got a really interesting hobby. They're a taxidermist. Like, you don't see that every day. Like, my goodness. So, if you want to make someone really unique and special, don't make that sort of diversity thing into like a checkbox. Give them a whole personality. Give them like some more unique traits.
Thanks, DR. Yeah, so important. I'd like to hear from both of you. You've both been doing this for a while, not just your own experiences, but also through your networks. What are some of the myths or the misconceptions about diverse representation in literature, and how can we address them?
Sure. I think part of it is, for a long time, hopefully they're getting a little better about it, traditional publishers, would say they don't know how to market books that have diverse characters in them. They just, don't know where on the shelf these books should go. So, like I said, hopefully that's getting a little bit better. So that was, definitely one of the myths in terms of, they didn't know how to market it. And a lot of times it just comes down to, okay, what marketing resources are you putting, behind a book? Bestsellers become bestsellers. Yes, people read it, but there's a lot of marketing behind it in order to make those stories visible so people can buy them. So I think that was one of the, the key myths. And I think another one is, if you're not, the books are, up to par, or, is it as good as, another book that they may read, or is it political, is it going to have all of these things that might make people uncomfortable, if, they're characters who don't have the readers, shared experiences. And people will do that in reviews as well, right? You will see that. I literally had a conversation yesterday with a friend of mine who's a romance author, and she writes multicultural romance. And she was telling me about getting a 1-star review, and literally it was like, the person said they enjoyed the book until they figured out the character was black. And that was the only reason they gave the book a 1-star. Totally loved the book until they figured out, it's like, not my kind of book. So, I think it's just, there's no just one myth. There's, a lot of myths, and I think a lot of it can also come from readers, right? And all of us sitting here, all of us in this room, we love, when we read a book and then people like us. I certainly do. I get excited when, I see people like me in books, or, in other books with people who aren't like me either. One of my favorite thrillers is I Am Pilgrim, and the protagonist is a 35-year-old white male, but I absolutely love that character. He doesn't look like me, his world and my world weren't the same, but I love that. And so I would say, just because a book has diverse characters doesn't necessarily mean that you can't connect with them, that, they won't become a beloved character for you. So, and I think it all comes back to some of the things that we were talking about earlier, making sure that they're full and complex and they're interesting and, all of that.
Thanks, Gledé. How about for you, Zia? What are some of the myths that you've experienced or you've heard through your network?
There's just one big myth that's just always on my mind lately. I have family in Florida, and some of them are educators, and they don't have really the ability to put books in the classroom anymore, because there's this idea, and it's a total myth, that any book that has a character in it who is queer is instantly about sex somehow, regardless of what the book's actually about. That it's somehow the existence of a queer character in a book of any type of queerness is, the book is automatically sexual. It could be that, you know, the main character is an elementary school kid and has two grandmas on one side of the family, like, and it must be sexual, or it's political, and the book is banned, and it's not allowed in the school library, it's not allowed in the school, and the teachers are afraid to put books in their classrooms for the kids to just pick up and read when they're done with their work. It's not, you know, not something that we see up here in Rhode Island, but it's a really, I think, just off the wall, that mode of thinking. I mean, it's such a pervasive myth that it's not just Florida, it's all over the place. There are several states and that have already enacted bans like this, and a whole bunch of school districts in states that don't have a statewide ban. And it's just, there are fights over it that are just all over the place. I think it's such a big misconception that really needs to go away.
Thanks, DR. So I do have a few more questions, but I'd like to just pause and ask you, the audience, is there anything based on what you've heard that you'd like to know more about, or something you'd like to ask before we keep going? You're pondering the questions for the end. You're saving them? I got you. Okay, I support that. The next question I have for you is, how do you know, you obviously, both of you have shared why you're doing this, why it matters to you personally. How do you know that your efforts to support diversity in literature are actually having an impact? If there's anything you can share, how do you confirm that the reasons you're doing this and that your work is actually having an impact?
I would say through reviews. People are very vocal about book reviews. Goodreads, anyone, which can be a nightmare for authors sometimes. But I think people will tell me in reviews, or they will write to me, or you know, it comes about in a conversation that someone would have, you know, with me when they discover certain things. Earlier, I said I don't, you know, beat people over the head with the fact that all of these are diverse characters, and so sometimes they miss that, and then for some reason it, you know, whether it's a light bulb that goes off or whatever the case may be, but they feel compelled to mention that, you know, in the review. And I actually got scolded in one review because, you know, the person kind of felt like, you know what, it's important, you know, and you know, the author didn't, I guess I didn't play it up enough for her, but I think those are sort of the key ways, and you know, of course having those conversations face to face, I think that's, how can I explain it? That's like the best feeling, you know, when someone has a conversation with you face to face and they tell you that, you know, reading about this character, you know, impacted them. So I think that's my favorite part, but you know, people will be verbal about it, or they will tell you in a review.
Thanks, Gledé. How about you, dear? How do you know your work is having an impact?
Well, reviews are such a big part of it, really. And if you read a book and you have something to say, even if you just, I like the book, just write that review, please. They really make a difference. Sometimes we're sitting there with our coffee and we're like dragging and we're going, why am I here? I feel like I'm typing into the void. And then there's a review and it's someone typed, I liked the book. And I'm like, yes, somebody read it, okay? But I had a moment with Hawthorne Academy, which I tried to make a group of friends that felt like a, you know, kind of a found family. And, you know, it's very much a coming of age story, and they discovered a lot about themselves, and a number of them discovered that they were queer. And I had a review, and it was 1 star, and it said, there are too many queer characters, that's not realistic, there should only be 1 or 2 in a friend group. And I'm like, yes, I did it right, because in almost every single friend group that I've been in with queer people, there's like 4 or 5 in the same group. It's like banding together, you know? You don't just have one, no, and especially not with a friend group that big. That was like, I wrote like a 10 person friend group here. So it's like, no, 2, oh no, are you kidding? And then I saw that it had gotten rated unhelpful a number of times. So I was like, so I was like, okay, good. And then the other time was I went to Dragon Con, and I'm wheeling into the panel room with my walker, and like you do when you're me. And I got up there, and I put this up here on the table, and I hear, I knew it! I'm the only person there, so I turn around, and there's someone, and she's sitting in the seat, and I'm like, yes? I knew you were disabled. Messing Academy. I'm like, oh, thank you. Because I must have done it right. So sometimes you're sitting there, and even when you're writing about someone who's maybe similar to yourself in some way, or similar to a family member or someone you love, you still aren't sure you're getting it right. And even when it goes through editors and beta readers, and several of them sometimes, you still aren't sure you're getting it right. And then you get an interaction like that in person or online, and it's just this great feeling of like, okay, I did do it right. Phew.
Thanks, Deanna. So we have readers here in the audience who are here to listen, but also hopefully interested in how they can continue to support diverse literature, make sure that representation is front and center. What is your advice to them on how they can, what can we all do to better support diversity representation in literature?
Read more. I mean, that's what that's what it's going to come down to, right? So, take a chance. Be intentional. Sometimes you have to be intentional. I belong to a few Facebook groups, and people have posted, I'm looking for thrillers written by authors of color, for example. So sometimes it helps to just go outside. We all have our favorites. We all have our favorite genres, our favorite authors, and that's a staple. But if you're intentional about it, then I would say that's one of the key things that you can do. And what you're doing right now, being here, being part of this panel, go up to an author at an event, ask questions. If you go to a bookstore, I don't know how much people go to bookstores anymore, but check out your usual and your favorites, and say, by the way, do you have any, insert your favorite genre, but with diverse characters. And it doesn't even always have to be by an author of color. It could be white authors too who write diverse characters. I'm thinking of writing a neurodiverse character in one of the novels that I'm working on, because I'm learning a lot about it, and because my son started having seizures when he was 8 months old, and he's 15 now, and we just got the clear from his neurologist that it looks like finally he's kind of outgrown it. And so I know of the struggles that we have with him, and so neurodiversity is interesting to me. And so again, just be intentional. I think that's the key. Just be intentional in making that decision. Oh, let me try something interesting. Let me try something by a different author. Let me read a book with diverse characters, and you might find that they really resonate with you, because like I said, at the end of the day, we're all human, and so there's always going to be something to connect with that character about, not just they're neurodiverse or disabled, or they're a person of color, or whatever the case may be.
Thanks, Gledé. Yeah, what is your advice to our group?
I'd add libraries to that, as well as bookstores. A lot of the time, a library really won't, you know, get a book in unless it's been requested, especially, you know, like an electronic copy. Sometimes they'll only get it'll be like 1 or 2 copies in a certain local area, but they'll get more, or they'll get an ebook copy if you request one. Then that will be available to more readers because they get them by contract, so they'll have them for a certain period of time, and then maybe more people will try them, especially in the winter months, because people aren't going to want to go out to the library to get their paper books. They're going to be more likely to get the book on Kindle or to get the book, you know, as an EPUB. So that's one thing to do to add to that. The other thing is talk about the books that you read. Word of mouth is huge. We don't have marketing campaigns. Even people who are published by the trad houses don't always have big marketing campaigns. They might take a chance and say, hey, look, we took a chance on you. We're not going to throw like the huge money behind you because you're not Stephen King, you're not Jim Butcher, you're not James Patterson, you're not Laurel K. Hamilton. So they're going to, they gave the contract, they published a book, but they're kind of depending on the author to do their own marketing, and any word of mouth you can give that author is going to be worth way more to them than saying you're reading the next Stephen King book to your friends. Because Stephen King's already got like loads of advertising budget coming from his publisher. You know, some of the other authors, they don't. The mid-listers, they don't. And that's typically where you're going to find the more diverse authors is going to be there. The other thing I say is when you are looking for books to read in a genre, ask people who aren't like you what they're reading, who read your genres, because sometimes you're going to find an amazing book that way. I also like to see what people are saying they don't want to read. Just like that negative review I got, I look for similar reviews on other books. And if I see a review like that, I'll give that book a try. Because I'll say to myself, hey, I bet that author's doing it right, and then I'll read it. If it's saying, oh, this book takes place in a suburb and there's too many black characters, I'm like, okay, go ahead and read it. You know, oh, I can't believe they put a Jewish character on a farm. I'm gonna read it. I want to read about a Jewish character on a farm. Sure, you know, let me read it. So sometimes the negative reviews are your friend. But when you do read a book like that, when you do find something diverse that's good, tell people, share it. Put that link in your social media. Just post it. Post a pretty picture of the book cover too, because people go gaga for that and they'll click on it.
Thanks, DR. I think both of you shared that we have to be intentional, but it doesn't have to be hard. What both of you are saying, it does not have to be hard. I think we think that diversity, you know, that it's this complex thing that it takes all this work, but both of you are talking about putting in your libraries, telling your friends, asking someone not like you for their ideas, right? These are all things within our power and can have tremendous change. Even today, as you walked around, I encourage you to go up to the tables of genres and authors that might not be your normal go-to. At least have a conversation. Listen, we're here for 6 hours. We like talking to you, regardless of whether or not you buy our books. Still, it's nice to learn from people, but maybe buy the book and give it to your school library or local library, right? Like I don't think you have to read it, but you can contribute to the greater good of people having access to it, even if it's not something you directly want. Okay, audience, I've given you time to process and think. What questions do you have for our panelists? Or thoughts, comments, doesn't have to be a question. Yeah, please.
I'd be curious, do you get any opportunities to talk to school kids? You know, to go into the lower grades and sort of be there as an author for them to see, so they can aspire with, you know, to, that they don't assume every author is a white male or what.
Yeah.
Do you get any opportunities like that, or do you try to make opportunities like that?
I had a couple of opportunities, and because I read primarily adult novels, you know, they wouldn't necessarily be appropriate in terms of the themes, you know, for the school kids, but I am working on a YA trilogy, And actually that is part of the marketing strategy that I'm thinking about, how do I approach schools. Someone came up to me at the Boston Book Festival, and she's a librarian, and she was looking for books for her kids with diverse characters and all, and things like that. So I haven't had a ton of opportunity, but again, like I said, mostly because I write adult books, but that will change with the works that I'm doing right now.
You can also talk about how you wrote as a child. As you know what I mean? You could
Yeah.
write as
I see what you mean.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
Otherwise,
yes.
like just to be a
Well, yeah, I was invited to a career day for next year because I missed the deadline for the high school in our town. So you're absolutely right. That's another way to, inspire people and yeah.
So one thing I learned is that typically the schools, for lower grades, elementary school especially, they have contracts with Scholastic. So they don't often allow authors who don't have contracts with Scholastic to come in. Sometimes you will find that like private schools do, they will have picture book authors come in typically. They'll be like appropriate for, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. They'll have authors like that come in and read to the kids. Sometimes like after school programs or daycares do that. Another thing I saw was that some ARIA authors have gone in and done like picture book type authors. And they feel like, I think more comfortable letting authors like that go in. Because it's for the younger grades, and for the older grades, I think they're a little bit less focused on that. One thing also that I found is it really kind of depends on how active is the PTA. I know that in my town, our schools, this is just the past year, I'm from Coventry. Just this past year, we started having, our school budget is no longer on a yearly referendum that the entire town votes for. So we were voted down for 5 years in a row for our budget, and so we had no budget for things like that in any of our schools at any level. So no, we had nothing like that in Coventry Public Schools. And when I looked into it, it was a big fat no because there's no funding. And I said, look, I would go to the high school for free. And they said, well, we still can't set aside the time because we still need the budget for facilities to, set up the gym and for the kids to be out of class and to have an assembly and all. And they do, and it does take funding. It does take funding for them to do that. So I think, maybe now I might look into it again. It might be different. And I certainly would talk to high schoolers because honestly, they should see that this is like a viable career path for somebody who maybe isn't as mobile physically as other people. But I don't know how to approach that beyond having somebody go in for you. There's also sometimes there's the assumption like that you charge a lot of money. I've spoken to a couple of teachers who are under the impression that you must charge like thousands of dollars to do events at school. No, no, it's like community outreach. Yeah, I'd write it off on my taxes as a charitable visit to the school. It's a public school. All right, no, I'm not going to charge thousands of dollars to go talk to high schoolers. But it's not something that's just as easy as you walk into the school with your book and go, hi, I'm an author, I want to talk to the kids. Especially with schools too, they have security and all this other stuff that they have nowadays too. So, if you know stuff, I know ARIA looks for people to come talk to the authors at the meetings sometimes. So if you happen to know school districts that are looking for authors, then maybe you want to reach out to Mike Squatrito. He'd be the person to contact about talking to ARIA. So if things are changing or are different in other school districts than the ones I have experience with, that's
maybe go talk to him, because I think that's a very good idea. I know I'm new to being an author, but because I have a book for kids, a very intentional part of my strategy, it will be going into schools. And even just being here today in a 4-minute conversation with someone who's part of their PTO in the school, approached me and said, how can we get to your school? I'd like to make sure we pay you for the books, right? But to talk about being an author, but I also really resonate with the message and the importance. But like DR said, if y'all have friends that are teachers or parents who are part of the school system, or you as taxpayers have a right to speak up about what you expect in schools, mention it, right? And maybe that's also a good way to give a donation, to say, here's money, I would like this to go towards bringing in a diverse author or a book about diverse characters to benefit the school, right? That's a great way to show your support for the overall industry. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, please.
Anyone who has ever dabbled in writing has probably heard, write what you know, write what you know. What advice would you give to authors or aspiring authors who want to include characters who fit into diverse communities that the author themselves may not necessarily?
I have an answer for that.
Oh, good.
That's literally part of my notes. I would say, in response to that question, first of all, get rid of this notion that you cannot write about a character who is not like you. That is the very definition of being an author. We create worlds. We, write about things that we know nothing about and make it authentic on the page. And how do we do that? We do our homework, we research, we talk to people, we investigate. And so it's no different when you're talking about writing characters who are not like you. And, I've seen discussions about this, online, and one camp saying, it was the book American Dirt. I don't remember who the author is. And there was this huge controversy, and then part of what came out of that, was, well, only, Black authors should write about Black characters and the Black experience, et cetera, et cetera. And I am really opposed to that, because, that's like saying, you know what, you like bread, you should only eat bread every single day for the rest of your life. No, this is what we do. We are in a creative endeavor, and, part of the responsibility is to get to know the characters and the worlds that we're creating and developing. And that's why I always give props to James Patterson, no matter what you feel about his, little cottage industry and hiring an army of ghostwriters. In the 90s, he created Alex Cross. And Alex Cross is one of the most famous detectives in thrillers and fiction. And, James Patterson created this Black man who was a clinical psychologist, and, he was with the, Metro Police Department in DC, and he had a family, and that was an important part of his identity, his family. And he wrote that character and released that first Alex Cross novel when his peers were writing about Black men as pimps and drug dealers, And so I'll forever give him props for creating that character. And so, that's what I would say. That is not true. I was on a panel a couple of years ago. I'm a member of Sisters in Crime. And I'm on the panel, and we talking, and, diversity kind of came up. And the panelist sitting next to me was terrified because the story she was writing, the villain or some character who did bad things was Black, and she was afraid she was going to get backlash for that. And I was like, no, tell the story. Tell the truth, There's another thriller author, Kimberly Bell. I don't know if it was her debut. It was called The Marriage Lie, and it was, a pretty, well-received novel. And the plot, I'm not going to give spoilers, but her husband disappeared, and they thought he died in a plane crash. And so anyway, the long and short of it is, at some point, as she's investigating what happened, one of her husband's friends was this Black guy, and he was doing bad things, He and the husband concocted some, evil scheme or whatever. And I didn't feel offended by that. I was pleased to see a multidimensional character. And, so don't be afraid that even if you're not, the same as the character that you're writing about, don't feel that you have to make them as sweet as pie because someone's going to say you're racist because, or whatever other ism you want to, put out there. So don't buy into that. This is what we do. As long as, you're respectful, as long as they're fully formed, complex, characters, you can pretty much do whatever you want. I'm sorry, I went on a diatribe. I feel very strongly about this topic.
Yes. That's what I was looking for, so that's where I came in.
That was my question.
Okay.
I agree to the extent that if you are coming at things from a standpoint of you have no cultural perspective on, let's say, let's say you're writing about Japanese people in Japan, and you've never even been to Japan, and you're trying to write about a Buddhist monk, and you don't even know anything about Buddhism in America, you have a lot of research to do. Do not sit down and write that book. Please don't. First, research. And by research, I don't mean go sit down and read books, because a lot of what you might find, maybe it was written 50 years ago and it's very outdated, or maybe written from a imperialist or colonist perspective and not authentic, okay? But I'm talking about you need to sit down and maybe talk to people who actually have lived in Japan or are from Japan and are Buddhist. So, start there. Preferably people who are actually monks. So that's you really, if you're going to write a Jewish character, maybe, start with someone who's culturally Jewish and doesn't keep kosher and isn't a Hasidic, because that's it's like you're starting at hard mode. Start and don't make it your main character. Make a character that's multidimensional, that's a real person, and use something that's accessible to you through your research method that you're going to use. I'm not saying go out and get a doctorate in Buddhist monks, before you write this book with a side character who's a Buddhist monk, who lived his whole life in Japan. I'm saying that you have your work cut out for you. So be prepared to work. And writing is work. It's fun. It's fun work. But the research part is we shouldn't shy away from that, especially when it comes to making our characters feel real.
So don't be afraid to do it, but do your homework.
Yeah, exactly.
Any last questions before we close? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just sort of listening to, it's like in stereo, it's really interesting, because you're saying, I write diverse characters, but for many people they're not diverse enough. Yet there's this definition of diversity that encompasses more than just a rough sketch of a race or national background, right? And you're saying represent, don't misrepresent. Here's how to go about it, and with intent, making sure that my groups of friends are, one queer person in a group is stupid. That's just stupid. That's just, it's not realistic, and it's also ignorant.
Or that person's going to be like a cat in a room full of rocking chairs the entire time we were with that group of friends. That's not really their friends.
Well, there's this sense of what is enough, and I've only a little bit heard from you.
Yeah, to be honest, you make that decision. That's your decision to really ponder. And, one of the worst things writers can do is the tokenism thing.
Right.
And so you don't want to do that. And so be intentional about what this character is and how they play into the plot. And that's why I always say go back to the baseline of creating characters that people will connect with, regardless of the diversity. I know, which is weird, because that's what we're talking about. And so once you have that foundation, then you're able to come to that place where the diversity, plays that role, right? And so you're marrying those two things together with creating these interesting characters that are human. At the end of the day, they're human, right? And so you have all of these attributes ascribed to that character, and then, okay, I want to, write that diverse character, and what is it about them, and in what form is that diversity going to take? And, as we've already established, it's beyond, race or gender or religion. Like I said, in this book, my protagonist is a director of bioinformatics. That's a woman in STEM. A woman of color in STEM, but, a woman in STEM. So that's diverse. So I think, I would just leave you with this, think broadly in terms of, diversity and what it is that you're trying to accomplish, with the character. And I think that would help guide you.
I just wanted to, I'm wondering if did you mean okay, so in Hunger Games, the character Rue, there was an enormous, when the movies came out, an enormous amount of criticism because they cast an actress who was black as Rue, but the book describes her as black, but only in one sentence. And some authors don't do a lot in the way of physically describing their characters. They take a sentence or two when they're first introduced, and beyond describing a different outfit that they might be wearing, that's a huge difference from what they typically wear. They don't go much further into describing physical traits of those characters. So it was a big surprise to a lot of viewers of the movie who were also readers of the books to find that this character was black. But she was. When you go back in the book, there is the line. You can read it. You can go look it up. But I remember there being a lot of people saying that sometimes, the author, is it that the author isn't good at describing characters or doesn't do enough descriptions in characters in general? Or is it that the author was afraid to do much description of that character because she was worried the readers wouldn't care about her if she emphasized the fact that she was black? And I think that also, I remember it's one of my shortcomings. I didn't do a lot of physical description of my characters in my earliest works. I would do a description of a few basic traits in the first introduction of the character, and that was it. You can easily forget that this character had this eye color or that character had that hair type. There's when sometimes a reviewer says something like, what was it when you said that the romance author, the reviewer was surprised and upset, and then once started the book when they found one of the characters was black? Yeah.
Yes. No, it happens, and the truth of the matter is, you can't be all things to all people. There are people who are going to think that, okay, we get it, stop. And there are other people who are going to say that, you're not doing it enough. One of my novels, I have reviewers who talk about that too, I didn't know she was black. And for her, it completely changed how she viewed the book in a positive way. She's like, oh, I didn't realize that's who I was reading about, And so my response was, well, this party scene, if you check out this couple of lines, you would know. And so I think it comes down to every author in terms of what decisions they make, And to me, the story I was writing, I didn't need to tell you every chapter that the character was black. It just didn't serve the story. So I think as authors, you need to focus on what's going to serve my story, what is my purpose, what am I trying to accomplish here? And you will never please all the people. You can only please some of the people some of the time. So, don't beat yourself up and get stressed out about things like that. And I know what you're talking about with the Hunger Games. Yeah, it was a lot of backlash with people who, didn't, I guess they missed that. Susan Collins may have been a little too subtle for their taste, I don't know.
Yeah, I think even for me, I have characters in my book that don't look like me, that I don't necessarily know a lot about, but I think part of it is also having, knowing your integrity and your intentions. If you like, if someone looked back on my 20-year career, they would see it's always been about inclusion and providing access and challenging norms and making sure that people who are underrepresented in a certain area feel seen. So, you know, that's part of like my core DNA, even if I'm writing about an area that is new to me. So even the example of Japan, do your research. But it's again, if you like, you just woke up one day and you've never ventured to think anything different for the past 25 years, and you go like 180, right? People might call BS. I think it's important to also gradually, you know, find ways to get there, right? Because you want, it should make sense with your brand and your values and your approach to life. It doesn't mean you have to associate with everything, but it shouldn't be a complete surprise, I think, to people why you're introducing something into the world. They're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. This person's always loved travel. They've always loved knowing stories about different people. They've always immersed themselves in cultures. They've just chosen a new one, right? But it shouldn't be like so out there, I think, right? That's really important that we have those strong brands and our values are strong.
You make a good point, because I think, you know, we see, I think I want to, where all of a sudden it's cool to have diverse characters, and so every book has to have a diverse character, and that's where the whole tokenism thing, you know, comes in, where you may have a disposable, you know, character just because, you know, you think that, you know, you're supposed to have that in there. So again, it comes back to, you know, intention. And if you're telling a story and it doesn't have any, you know, diverse characters, someone might say, well, that's not realistic to the world that we're living in, you know. But you might be able to say, well, it's because of the kind of story I'm telling, this, and this. So you know, my thing is, it has to be intentional and it has to make sense. And like my friend on the panel, you know, people shouldn't feel like they need to cave to pressure. I think, you know, there are things that collectively we can say, well, that's just wrong. You know, I think collectively as human beings, there are things that we can see that, you know, just, you know, not right, and that's absolutely, you know, wrong. But it's a complex subject, and I think at the end of the day, it comes down to, you know, like you said, it's your values and your intent, you know, and what you're trying to accomplish, and does it align with who you are, you know? So, you know, that's what it comes down to. Years ago, you know, there were really bad things, you know, in books that we look at today, it's like, wow, that's really not good. You know, like, I'm watching the Jeffersons reruns, and I'm like, wow, George Jefferson was really racist. He really was. And the things that would come out of his mouth, I'm like, I can't believe the writers wrote that. But the audience loved it, and they were eating it up. And I'm like, today, that show would not make it to the air. Episode 1 of season 1 would not air. And so I end with, I'll leave you with this. Know your audience, know your intent, know your purpose.
So I want to be respectful of time. Thank you to both of our panelists for your insights, for your practical advice, for sharing your complex and diverse characters with the world. We'll be here at the event. We'll be here in the room if you want to continue to engage with us. And thank you for staying and spending your time with us too.
Thank you. So there were 5 attendees.
There was a few more. They left.
It was 9 total, I counted, yeah. I don't know why I was counting, I just did.
Thank you all for staying and your engagement. We
Yeah,
really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.